They said it in low voices at first, as if the wind itself might carry the shame of it. They believed she would die alone. In the spring, when the plains turned the color of old gold and the rivers ran high with snowmelt, a single wagon rolled west and did not return. By summer, the story had hardened into certainty. A woman abandoned in Apache territory could not last. That belief settled over the town like dust, thick and final, and it let everyone sleep at night. The woman had a name strong enough to hold a life together. Her name was Ruth Calder. She had been born under a wide Ohio sky, raised on hymns and hard work, and taught early that silence was sometimes safer than truth. She learned to mend shirts, to read the weather by the clouds, and to keep her head down when men argued. No one taught her how to survive betrayal, though the land would soon insist she learn. The wagon train that carried Ruth west had started with promise. Families spoke of fertile valleys, of freedom from debts, of a place where a person could begin again. The trail was rough but hopeful, and for weeks the wheels sang the same steady song against the dirt. Ruth traveled with her husband, Elias Calder, a man whose charm came easy and whose patience ran thin. He had eyes that always searched the horizon, as if the next mile might hold a better version of himself. By the time the plains gave way to harsher country, the song stopped. Water grew scarce. Tempers flared. Whispers followed Ruth's like shadows. She noticed how conversations paused when she approached, how eyes slid away from hers. Elias began to speak to her only when necessary, his voice sharp, his kindness spent. The land seemed to mirror the change, stretching wider and emptier, daring them to turn back. The decision was made one night under a sky crowded with stars. It was not announced, not voted on, not prayed over. It came as a quiet agreement between men who feared slowing down more than they feared God. Ruth overheard fragments while she pretended to sleep. Words like risk and burden and Apache territory drifted through the dark. No one said her name out loud, but she felt it there all the same, heavy as a stone in her chest. They told her at dawn, Elias would not meet her eyes. He spoke of supplies, of impossible choices, of how the group could not carry everyone. His voice shook just enough to sound regretful, though his hands were steady as he tied the reins. Another man placed a small bundle at Ruth's feet, a canteen half full, a strip of dried meat, a blanket worn thin. They told her she would be safer if she stayed put, as if safety were something that waited politely in the desert. Ruth did not beg. Pride can be a quiet thing, but it kept her standing straight as the wagons rolled away. Dust rose and swallowed the trail, erasing the past with every turn of the wheel. When the sound finally faded, the silence pressed in so close she could hear her own breath. She was alone in Apache territory, a place spoken of only in warnings and prayers. The men believed that was the end of her story. What Ruth believed was simpler. She believed she was still breathing. The land around her was unforgiving but honest. Red earth stretched to the horizon, broken by scrub and stone, sun-burned without apology. Ruth took stock the way her mother had taught her in lean winters. She counted steps, measured shadows, rationed fear. Each movement was careful, each choice weighed. She walked until her legs trembled, then rested beneath a twisted mesquite tree that offered more symbol than shade. As the day wore on, memories rose like mirages, Elias laughing on their wedding day, promises made with easy confidence. The way his hand had slipped from hers on the trail, inch by inch, until there was nothing left to hold. Ruth let herself feel the hurt once, fully, then folded it away. The land had no patience for sorrow. Apache territory was not empty, despite what stories claimed. It was watched. Ruth felt it in the way the air seemed to listen, in the sudden stillness of birds. She knew the tales told back east, painted in fear and ignorance, but she also knew stories were shaped by those who survived to tell them. She wondered what truths lay hidden beyond the warnings. As evening fell, the heat loosened its grip. Ruth found water where rock dipped low, a narrow stream stubborn enough to survive. She drank slowly, resisting the urge to empty the canteen. Survival demanded discipline. She built a small fire, keeping it low, remembering her father's lessons about light and distance. Flames could warm and betray in equal measure. That night, as stars returned to claim the sky, Ruth heard footsteps, not rushed, not careless, measured. Her heart hammered, but she did not run. Running wasted strength. She stood, hands visible, breath steady. From the shadows emerged a figure with a presence as solid as the earth itself. He was tall, his posture straight, his gaze sharp without cruelty. His name, she would later learn, was 10 Bears, a name that carried weight and warning in equal parts. They regarded each other across the fire, two lives balanced on a moment. Ruth felt the urge to speak, to explain herself, but words felt small. 10 Bears studied her as one might study weather, reading signs others missed. He said nothing, and that silence was not empty. It was deliberate. Around them, the night listened. The days that followed blurred into a test of endurance. Ruth moved when told, rested when allowed, learned to read gestures as carefully as words. She observed the Apache way of moving through the land, leaving little trace, taking only what was needed. 10 Bears did not offer kindness in the way she understood it, but he did not offer harm either. That, she learned, was its own form of mercy. Ruth thought often of the men who had left her. She imagined them reaching their destination, telling her story as a cautionary tale. She wondered if Elias ever woke in the night with her name on his lips, or if relief had settled over him like a warm blanket. The thought hardened something inside her, not into bitterness, but into resolve. Apache territory challenged every belief Ruth carried. It was dangerous, yes, but it was also alive with order and respect. Children laughed. Elders spoke with authority earned by years, not force. Ruth saw strength in community, survival rooted in understanding rather than conquest. Each day stripped away another layer of fear she had been taught to wear. Still, danger lingered. Soldiers patrolled the edges of the land, suspicion riding alongside them. A woman like Ruth belonged nowhere in their eyes. She was too Eastern for the Apache, too wild for the towns. She existed in the space between, where mistakes were punished and mercy was rare. One afternoon, as thunderheads gathered without rain, 10 Bears led Ruth to a high ridge. From there, the land unfolded in every direction, vast and unyielding. He spoke then, his voice low and steady, telling her of choices and consequences, of debts that could not be ignored. He warned her that the men who abandoned her had set more than one danger in motion. Ruth felt the weight of his words settle deep. She realized then that surviving the desert was only the beginning. The fatal mistake made by those who left her behind had reached farther than they knew. It had drawn lines that could not be erased. As the first drops of rain finally fell, rare and precious, Ruth looked west, toward a future as uncertain as the land beneath her feet. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the past waited, unfinished. And as thunder rolled across Apache territory, one truth rose clear and undeniable. They believed she would die alone. They were wrong. The rain did not last long, but it changed the smell of the land, pulling life up from the dust. Ruth stood beside 10 Bears until the last drops vanished into the ground, her skin cool for the first time in days. She sensed that the ridge was not chosen by chance. From there, trails could be seen and danger spotted early. It was a place for decisions, not comfort. 10 Bears turned and began the descent without asking if she would follow. Ruth did. She had learned that questions sometimes weakened a moment. As they walked, she noticed how he touched the land lightly, reading it with his feet and eyes. Every broken twig spoke to him. Every shadow carried meaning. She realized how blind she had been before, trusting maps and promises instead of paying attention. They reached a small camp hidden between rock walls that folded inward, like sheltering arms. Fires were already lit, smoke rising thin and careful. Faces turned toward Ruth, curious but guarded. No one rushed her. No one shouted. The stillness was heavier than noise. A woman with silver threaded through her dark hair studied Ruth closely. Her name, spoken later, was Iron Willow, and her eyes missed nothing. Ruth felt the weight of being an outsider settle into her bones. She was fed, given water, and shown where to sleep, but kindness came with distance. That night, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, she listened to voices murmur beyond the firelight. She could not understand the words, but she understood the tone. Concern, debate, warning. Her presence had stirred something old. Over the next days, Ruth learned fragments of the past she had stepped into. Apache territory was under pressure from every side. Soldiers pushed closer. Settlers crossed lines they pretended not to see. Broken treaties hung in the air like smoke that never cleared. Ten Bears was not just a hunter or guide. He was a war leader marked by loss and responsibility. Each choice he made carried the lives of many. Ruth also learned why her abandonment mattered. A wagon train did not simply disappear without consequence. When people vanished, rumors followed. Soldiers asked questions. They did not care who was guilty. They cared only about control. The men who left Ruth behind had protected themselves by turning her into a ghost. A dead woman raised fewer questions than a living one. At night, Ruth dreamed of wheels creaking away from her, of voices fading into dust. She woke with her heart racing, unsure which world was more dangerous. Iron Willow noticed the shadows under her eyes and pressed bitter herbs into her hands. Survival, Ruth learned, was shared here, but trust was earned slowly. One evening, Ten Bears returned late, his jaw tight, his movements sharp. He spoke with Iron Willow in low tones. Ruth caught words in English this time. Soldiers. River crossing. A reward. The final word struck her like a blow. A reward meant someone was being hunted. She did not need to ask who. Fear settled in her stomach, cold and steady. The fatal mistake of abandoning her had not ended on the trail. It was still unfolding, pulling strangers and enemies toward her path. She wondered if Elias knew what he had started. She wondered if he would recognize her now, hardened by sun and truth. Days later, a trader arrived at the edge of camp, a man named Gideon Crow. His coat was fine, his smile thinner. He brought news wrapped in polite words. The West was changing fast. Forts were rising, bounties whispered through saloons. Gideon's eyes lingered on Ruth a moment too long, calculation flickering there before he looked away. That night, 10 Bears warned her quietly. Gideon Crow served no side but his own. He sold stories as easily as goods. A woman abandoned in Apache territory was a story worth money. Alive, she was dangerous. Dead, she was convenient. Ruth felt the walls closing in, not from the land, but from the lies traveling faster than any horse. She offered to leave. The words tasted bitter, but she spoke them anyway. She would not bring destruction to those who had shown her restraint. 10 Bears studied her for a long moment. When he answered, his voice carried iron. Leaving would not stop what was coming. It would only make her easier to catch. Ruth understood then that survival was no longer just about staying alive. It was about choosing where to stand when the world decided your worth. She began to learn the language, the signs, the rhythms of Apache life. Not as a visitor, but as someone preparing for a storm. Far away, Elias called a road with other men toward a town that promised safety. He laughed more easily now, spoke of Ruth as a tragedy, unavoidable and sad, at night. Though he dreamed of her eyes watching him from the dark, he ignored the dreams. Men like him always did, until the past demanded payment. As autumn crept closer, tension thickened. Scouts reported soldiers moving south. Shots echoed once in the distance, a warning rather than a battle. Children were sent farther into the hills. Fires burned lower. Ruth felt the weight of eyes on her again, not with suspicion, but with expectation. Her fate was tied to theirs now, whether she wanted it or not. One dawn, Iron Willow placed a knife in Ruth's hand. The blade was worn smooth by time. Protection, she said. Responsibility. Ruth accepted it, knowing the gift carried meaning deeper than steel. On the ridge where rain had first fallen, Ruth stood again beside 10 Bears, watching dust rise on the horizon. Riders were coming. How many? She could not tell. Only that the past was riding fast, and it knew her name. The riders on the horizon moved like a dark thought given shape. Dust rose behind them in a thin line, steady and patient. 10 Bears did not reach for his weapon. He watched, counting, reading the rhythm of hooves. Ruth stood beside him, her fingers tight around the knife Iron Willow had given her. The blade felt heavier now, as if it understood the moment better than she did. The camp shifted quietly. No panic, no shouting. People moved with purpose, gathering children, hiding supplies, erasing signs of life. Ruth noticed how discipline replaced fear. This was not the first time danger had approached, only the first time it carried her shadow with it. From another direction, Gideon Crow watched through a brass scope, his breath slow and measured. He had followed rumors like a trail of coins, each one leading closer to a prize. A woman left to die in Apache territory who did not die at all was worth more than gold. Gideon believed in opportunity, not loyalty. If soldiers paid better, he would guide them. Silence paid better, he would sell that too. For now, he watched and waited. Closer to the riders, Captain Silas Harrow rode at the front, his uniform dusty but precise. He was a man shaped by orders and ambition, convinced the land existed to be claimed. Reports had reached him of an Eastern woman living among the Apache. Such a story threatened neat lines and simple rules. Harrow wanted clarity, he wanted control, and he wanted the reward promised for answers. Back in the camp, Iron Willow pulled Ruth aside. Her voice was calm, but her eyes carried urgency. Soldiers did not come only for land, they came for symbols. A woman like Ruth, alive and visible, challenged the lie that abandonment was mercy. If Ruth was found, the truth would spread, and truth was dangerous. Ruth felt the weight of that responsibility press into her chest. She had been made into a story without consent once before. She would not allow it again, easily. Yet she knew hiding forever was not living. Every choice narrowed the path ahead. 10 bears gathered the elders. Words passed between them, firm and low. Ruth caught her name spoken once, then again she did not interrupt. When 10 bears turned to her, his gaze held neither blame nor comfort, only reality. The soldiers would search. Gideon Crow would talk. The land could hide them for a time, but time was thinning. A plan formed in pieces. Some would move deeper into the hills. Others would draw attention away. Ruth would travel with a small group toward the river, where borders blurred and choices multiplied. It was not safety, only movement. Stillness, 10 bears believed, was the most dangerous place of all. As night fell, Ruth packed lightly. Canteen, the knife, a strip of cloth iron willow pressed into her hand. For remembrance, she said. Ruth did not ask of what. Goodbyes were quiet. No promises were made. Promises were fragile things. They left before dawn, Ruth riding behind a young scout named Red Falcon, whose eyes stayed sharp even when his face remained unreadable. The land shifted as they moved, opening and closing like a living thing. Ruth felt the pull of every step, the knowledge that she was being carried toward something she could not yet see. Behind them, Gideon Crow finally moved. He had seen enough. He rode hard toward Captain Harrow, rehearsing his words. He would tell the truth, shaped just enough to benefit him. A woman, alive, protected, Apache territory. The captain's eyes would sharpen, coin would change hands. Captain Harrow listened without expression. Gideon's story confirmed what he already suspected. Harrow gave orders, quick and efficient. Tracks would be followed. Camps searched. Told himself this was duty, nothing more. Still, the idea of a woman surviving where she should not stirred something uncomfortable inside him. Miles away, Elias Calder sat in a saloon, nursing a drink he did not need. News drifted in, as gossip often did. Soldiers, Apache territory, a woman. He laughed too loudly, dismissing it as frontier nonsense. Yet his hand shook when he lifted the glass. The past had a way of riding faster than reason. On the trail, Ruth felt eyes on her, even when none were visible. Red Falcon spoke little, but when he did, it mattered. He warned her of places where sound carried, where the land betrayed the careless. Ruth listened, learning again, always learning. Survival had become a language she was finally beginning to understand. One evening, they reached the river. It ran wide and restless, marking lines men argued over, but water ignored. On the far bank lay uncertainty. Crossing meant leaving Apache territory, stepping into another kind of danger. Staying meant waiting for soldiers who believed they owned the future. They camped in reeds, fireless shadows among shadows. Ruth lay awake, listening to water move endlessly forward. She thought of 10 bears, of Iron Willow, of the life she had been folded into and might soon tear apart. She thought of Elias, not with longing, but with clarity. The woman he abandoned no longer existed. At first light, Red Falcon stiffened. Voices carried across the water. Soldiers, close. Too close. orders snapped sharp and familiar. Ruth's heart hammered, but her hands stayed steady. Fear no longer ruled her, it informed her. From the far bank, Captain Harrow studied the river. His scouts reported signs of recent crossing. He smiled thinly. The chase sharpened his focus. This was the kind of pursuit that made reputations. It's unseen by all. Gideon Crow watched from higher ground, weighing options once more. He wondered which side would pay him best by the end of the day. Ruth rose slowly, meeting Red Falcon's gaze. The moment had arrived, whether she was ready or not. The river surged between worlds, and behind her, the pass closed in. The river did not slow for anyone. It pulled at branches and whispered against stone, a sound that filled the space between heartbeats. Ruth stepped into the cold water with Red Falcon beside her, each step careful, each breath measured. On the far bank, voices grew clearer. Captain Harrow's men were spreading out, certain they were close to something worth claiming. Red Falcon signaled once, sharp and final. They could not cross now. Too many eyes. Too many guns waiting for an excuse. They moved downstream instead, keeping to cover, letting the river steal their tracks. Ruth felt the weight of every decision press harder. Each choice narrowed the path, but sharpened it too. Across the water, Captain Harrow grew impatient. His certainty had hardened into expectation, and expectation did not like delay. Out. He ordered his men to fan out, to cut off every likely route. He told himself this was necessary. That order required force. Still, something unsettled him. A woman who refused to vanish challenged the rules he had built his life upon. From the ridge, Gideon Crow watched the soldiers spread like ants. He smiled thinly. Chaos always created opportunity. He had not decided yet which side he would betray last. As the sun climbed, Ruth and Red Falcon reached a narrow canyon where the land folded in tight. The walls rose steep and close, carrying sound. Red Falcon hesitated. This place could hide them or trap them. Ruth looked at the stone, the shadows, the marks left by water over time. She saw not a trap but a test. They moved in. Hours passed in tense silence. Ruth's thoughts drifted to 10 bears in Iron Willow, to the life she might never see again. She wondered if the land would allow her to keep it. She wondered what kind of ending the desert believed she deserved. By late afternoon, the canyon opened onto a high plain. Wind swept through tall grass, bending it like waves. Red Falcon slowed, listening, too quiet. Ruth felt it too, the pause before a storm. She tightened her grip on the knife, not with fear, but with resolve. On the edge of the plain, a small group waited. Familiar shapes stepped forward. 10 bears stood at the center, his presence steady as the ground beneath him. Relief surged through Ruth, sharp and almost painful. He had not left her to face the past alone. He spoke quickly. The soldiers were pushing hard. Gideon Crow had been seen riding between camps. The land was tightening its grip. 10 bears had gathered allies, not just Apache, but others who had learned the cost of broken promises. The frontier had many ghosts, and some were ready to speak. As dusk fell, fires were lit far from the plain, false signals meant to draw pursuit away. Ruth watched smoke rise, thinking of how ice leaf stories could be shaped by distance. She realized then that the fatal mistake made by those who abandoned her was believing she would remain silent. Captain Harrow followed the false trail with grim satisfaction, only to find it empty. Anger flared. He hated being outplayed. Orders snapped sharper now. Night fell with tension thick as smoke. In the darkness, Ruth moved with 10 bears and the others toward a meeting place chosen long ago. It lay where old trade paths crossed, a place known to those who remembered before borders were drawn. Their truth could be spoken aloud, witnessed by many. Elias Calder rode into that same night, driven by rumors he could no longer ignore. Guilt had a way of pulling harder than fear. He told himself he needed to see it with his own eyes. Did not know what he would say if he found her. He did not know if words would matter. Gideon Crow arrived too, drawn by the promise of a bigger payoff. He sensed something shifting, something that could not be bought easily. For the first time, doubt crept in. By dawn, people gathered. Not an army, but a community shaped by shared loss and stubborn hope. Ruth stood among them, visible, unhidden. She felt the weight of eyes on her, not judging, but waiting. Captain Harrow arrived last, confident fading into calculation as he took in the scene. Too many witnesses, too many stories converging. Control slipped, just enough to make him uneasy. Ruth stepped forward. The moment stretched, tight and electric. The land seemed to lean in. Every path, every lie, every abandoned promise had led here. The truth hovered on the edge of being spoken, powerful enough to change everything. And as the wind swept across the plain, carrying the past with it, Ruth knew one thing with certainty. Whatever happened next, she would not face it alone. The wind moved through the plain as if it carried a long memory, brushing against every face gathered there. Ruth stood still, her spine straight, her voice steady when she finally spoke. She did not shout, she did not beg. She told the truth in simple words, the kind that did not need force to be heard. She spoke of the wagon trail, of the quiet decision made before dawn, of being left behind with just enough supplies to quiet a guilty conscience. She spoke of survival, of learning the land instead of fearing it, of finding humanity where she had been told none existed. The crowd listened, even the soldiers did not interrupt. Captain Harrow felt something shift as her words spread outward, impossible to pull back. This was not the story he had prepared for. This was not a criminal or a captive. This was a woman who had endured abandonment and refused to disappear. He realized too late that arresting her would only confirm every accusation she had spoken. 10 Bears stepped forward then, his presence firm but calm. He spoke of borders drawn without consent, of treaties broken as easily as sticks under a boot. He did not threaten, he reminded. He made it clear that Ruth had been given shelter because she was human, not because she was useful. The Apache territory had not been her grave. It had been her proving ground. Iron Willow joined him, her voice quiet and strong. She spoke to the women listening, to the mothers and daughters who knew the cost of silence.
Oh.
Her words carried farther than any rifle ever could. Captain Harrow looked around and understood the danger of pressing forward. Too many witnesses. Too many truths layered together. He gave an order to stand down, his pride bruised but intact enough to survive. The reward quietly vanished, swallowed by the realization that some mistakes could not be corrected with force. Gideon Crow felt the moment slip through his fingers. There was no profit left here, only consequences. He turned his horse away without a word, already planning which stories to forget and which roads to avoid. From the edge of the gathering, Elias Calder stepped forward, pale and uncertain. The sight of Ruth standing whole and unbroken struck him harder than any accusation. He tried to speak, but the words tangled. Ruth looked at him once, really looked, and found no anger left to offer, only distance. She did not need his apology to close the wound he had opened. She spoke instead to the people who had believed she would die alone. She told them survival was not a miracle, but a choice made again and again. She told them abandonment was not mercy, and silence was not peace. As the sun climbed higher, the gathering began to break apart. Soldiers withdrew. Families returned to their paths. The land exhaled. Ruth felt the tension leave her body in slow waves, replaced by something steadier. Belonging. In the days that followed, choices were made. Ruth did not return east. The past had nothing left to offer her there. She remained near Apache territory, living between worlds, helping where she could. She learned to trade, to heal, to listen. Stories spread not of danger, but of resilience. 10 Bears continued to lead, his burden lighter, knowing truth had been spoken. Iron Willow watched Ruth with quiet pride, knowing survival had shaped her into something rare. Red Falcon rode farther now, carrying news and hope in equal measure. Sometimes at dusk, Ruth walked to the ridge where rain had once fallen and changed everything. She remembered the woman who stood there believing she had been abandoned to die. She honored that fear without letting it rule her. The land remained harsh, honest, and alive. And Ruth Calder lived not as a warning, but as proof that the fatal mistake was never leaving her behind. It was believing she would fade without being seen.